we have a special treat. Our beloved Biff, Mithohoefer, is here again. And he teaches yin yoga workshops and teacher trainings throughout the U.S. and internationally. He has studied shamanism with teachers of the Shipibo tradition of Eastern Peru. He's a student of cross-cultural shamanism as taught by Angelus Arian. And he's the author of the Yin Yoga Kit and co-author of the Therapeutic Yoga Kit. Biff is a founder and director of the Jamtse Sponsorship Project for the support of Tibetan refugee children. He lives with his family in Dorset, Vermont. He will speak to us this evening on a story. That's the title of his talk, A Story. Please welcome him.
It really is such a pleasure to be back here at Yogaville, and it's always such an honor to be asked to participate in this beautiful satsang. But I do want to make one thing clear before I start. You invited me. Just in case. So tonight, it may not surprise some of you who know me, but tonight I want to tell you a story. And it's a story that's been buzzing around inside me, wanting to get out for a while. And it's a very old story from Croatia. And it's quite a complex story, but I realize what keeps drawing me to it is that at its heart, it's a very simple story. And it's the story of a young man, a person, who loses touch with their own heart. And in storytelling language, we would say that a black magic spell has been cast on them. They've lost touch with their own heart. And it's also a story of how unconditional love turns out to be the most powerful magic of all. So it's with great respect for the story and great gratitude for all the storytellers who have held these stories so gently and brought them to us with all their wisdom. And so now I'd like to share with you the story of the Enchanted Forest. Once upon a time, a long, long time ago, in a small cottage next to an enchanted forest, lived an old woman and her son. And the woman had been widowed long before, and she lived peacefully with her son in this little cottage by the enchanted forest. And one day, the young man took a walk in the enchanted forest, and he grew tired and sat on a rock to rest. And as he did, a beautiful silver snake crawled out from under the rock. And the young man said, "Oh, you're such a beautiful snake. I'd love to take you home for a pet." And as he said that, the snake became a beautiful young woman. And she turned to the young man and she said, "Thank you. I've been under a terrible spell that's trapped me in the body of a snake." But as she spoke, she never stuck her tongue out, for her tongue was forked, because she was really a snake taking on the form of a woman. So the young man and the young woman walked through the enchanted forest all day, and before nightfall, he had fallen in love with her and proposed marriage, which she gladly accepted. And they went back to the small cottage to tell their mother. And the old mother was overjoyed until she got a good look at the young woman. And the old mother was wise to the ways of this world and of the next, and she was suspicious. So she turned to her son and she said, "Son, I'm afraid your wife-to-be is a snake and she has a forked tongue." And the son grew angry and said, "No, you're the witch." And from that moment on, he pushed her out of his heart. And the couple soon got married, and they moved into the cottage with the old mother. And time passed, and the snake woman became meaner and meaner towards her mother-in-law. and she made her do all the nasty work, and she berated her constantly, and her son never defended her. But one day, in a cold winter day, the young bride said to the old mother, "I want some snow to wash my face with. I want to keep my complexion beautiful." And the old mother said, "But I'm sure to slip on the ice and freeze to death." And the young woman laughed and said, "All the better." And because the poor old mother knew that her son would defend his wife, she didn't say a word, but she trudged slowly up the mountain to get the snow. But before she reached the top, she stopped to pray. But before she prayed, she thought, if I pray, God will know of my son's sins, and I don't want that. And so she remained quiet. But the ears of heaven hear more than just prayers. And soon she was able to fill the bucket with snow and return safely to the cottage. But it made her daughter-in-law even angrier, and she stomped off to her room. Well, days passed, and soon the young woman decided she wanted a fish for her dinner. So she said to the old mother, "Go to the lake and get me a fish." And the mother said, "But it's very cold, but the ice is thin, and I'm sure I'll fall through and drown." And the young woman said, "Ha ha ha, all the better." And her son laughed along with her. And the old woman was very sad, but she trudged up the road to the lake to get a fish. And as she walked out on the ice began to crack, and she stopped to pray, but she thought again, if I pray, God will learn of my son's sins, and I don't want that. So she remained quiet. But just at that moment, a seagull was flying overhead with a big fish in its mouth. And the fish gave a wriggle and fell right before the old woman's feet. And the old mother took the fish back to the daughter-in-law. And of course, the daughter-in-law was even angrier. And time went by. And one evening, they were sitting by the fire. And the old mother took up a shirt of her son's to mend it. And her daughter-in-law saw her, and she screamed at her, "Let go of my husband's shirt. You'll just ruin it." And her son said, "Yes, do as my wife said." And the poor old mother was so sad. She went out on the porch to sit in the cold winter wind was blowing, and she was crying quietly, and she began to pray. And as she did, a young woman came down the road, and her coat was ripped, and she was shivering with the cold. And she was holding bundles of firewood that she had for sale. And the young woman said, "Mother, would you like to buy some firewood?" And the old mother said, "No, dear, but come here and let me mend your coat." And so the old mother sewed up the coat very nicely, so the young woman was warm and cozy again. And she gave the old mother, a bundle of firewood as a gift. Well, the old mother returned to the cottage just in time to see her son and her daughter-in-law getting ready to go out to dinner in the village. But before they left, the daughter-in-law said, "Make sure you heat my water up, because I want a nice hot bath when I get back. And don't forget to feed the hens and clean the chicken coop." Because the chickens were very important to the young bride, because she was the only one in the whole village who could get their eggs to hatch in the middle of winter. But of course, she was the only one in the village using magic. So the old mother cleaned the chicken coop and fed the chickens. And went back to the house to start a fire to heat the water. As the fire started, she went outside to get water. But when she came back to the cottage, she heard singing and laughing. And when she entered the room, there were 12 little elves. And they were dancing and singing and laughing. And she said, "Who are you?" And they said, "Oh, we're the fire elves." And sure enough, their coats were red like the flames, and their long gray beards were like the smoke. So she was so enthralled, and their enthusiasm was so contagious that the old mother found herself dancing and laughing and singing with the little elves. And it was the happiest time she had had since she had been a young girl, dancing and laughing with her husband. But after a time, the sadness of her son weighed on her, and she sat in the chair looking sad. And the elves stopped, and they said, "What's wrong? What's wrong?" And she told them of her son's enchantment and how she felt pushed away from his heart and how sad she was. And they all began to think, and they stroked their long gray beards. And after a time, the smallest elf of all, named Wee Tinkalily, said, "I have an idea. The one thing that snakes can't resist is our magpies." And the elf said, if we get some magpie eggs and change them for the chicken eggs, when the chickens hatch, the snake will not be able to resist them, and she'll stick her forked tongue out in your son, and all the people in the village will see who she really is. And so they had a plan. But just at that moment, the daughter-in-law came back in the house. Just as she did, 11 of the elves disappeared in a puff of smoke. But little Wee Tinkalily jumped into the fire to burn like a log. And the daughter-in-law said, "What was that?" And the old mother said, "Oh, it was just a breeze stirring the embers." But she was suspicious, and she looked more and more closely till she stuck her nose right down by the log. And Wee Tinkalily couldn't resist. He reached up and tweaked her nose, and she jumped back screaming. "What was that?" she screamed. And the old mother, covering her mouth to keep from smiling, said, "Oh, it's just some chestnuts in the fire. Be careful." And the daughter-in-law went to her room in a huff. Well, Wee Tinkalily jumped out of the fire and ran off to find some magpie eggs. Well, the time came when the chickens would hatch, and the bride invited the whole village to come to see this spectacle. And as the first magpie egg hatched, the snake couldn't resist, and she stuck her tongue out and began to hiss and fell to the floor and began to wriggle towards the magpie. And the whole village was terrified. They ran from the room. And the old mother turned sadly to her son, and she said, "Now do you see who your wife really is?" But he couldn't see. So he screamed at her, "You're the witch. Get out of my house and never come back." And the poor old mother was so sad, but she said, "I only ask one thing, that you let me leave after dark so the people in the village won't see." And sure enough, she waited till after dark. And she made a small bag of some clothes, and she took some of her firewood, and she left the cottage. But as she stepped over the threshold, the whole cottage began to shake. The fire went out, and the crucifix fell from the mantelpiece, and the scales fell from the young man's eyes. And finally, he could see his wife for who she was. But he was still scared of her, so he said, in a very meek way, "Maybe I should follow her." And his wife said, "Yes, that way we can watch her die." And so they followed the old woman, but they were way behind her. So that night, as it got colder and colder, the old mother stopped to light a fire with the firewood that she had been given. And as the flames broke out, so did the 12 little elves, singing and dancing and happy. But they noticed right away that the poor old mother was sad. And so they went to her again and said, "How can we help you? What can we do?" And they thought and thought as they stroked their long gray beards. And once again, Wee Tinkalily came up with an idea. She said, "I know, we have to go see the forest king. He'll know what to do." So one little elf took out a small silver horn and he blew it, and a beautiful stag appeared from the forest. And another elf took out a horn and he blew it, and 12 squirrels appeared. The elves helped the old mother onto the stag, and they mounted the squirrels, and off they went into the forest to find the forest king. And sure enough, soon they came to a giant clearing meadow, and in the middle of it was a gigantic oak tree. It was so big that there were 7 palaces in the tree and one whole village. And the elves went to the forest king and they said, "Can you help her? This is what's happened." And the forest king said, "Of course I can." And he waved his hand at the village that was in the oak tree. And the mother looked, and she saw that it was the very same village that she had been brought up in. And there on the front porch of her old house were her parents, the age they were when she was a young girl. And walking down the road was the young man she was to marry, coming to court her for the first time. And the forest king said, "All you have to do is cross the fence and clap your hands, and you can live for eternity in the very happiest moment of your life." And she said, "Wonderful, but what of my son?" "Oh," she said, "don't worry." Oh, he said, "Don't worry. He will be born after your time. You'll never know of him." And she said, "But what of him?" And the forest king said, "Don't worry, his fate is his own." And she stopped and she said, "No, I can't leave my life and my son." And as she said that, the earth opened up and the giant oak tree sunk down, and it left just the forest king. And he said to her, "You've chosen life and you've chosen your son over all that I could give you and your happiest moments. And you've broken the curse." And all of a sudden, the woman became a snake again and crawled under the rock. The forest king disappeared, and the young son knelt before his mother, begging her forgiveness. But she had never pushed him away, and he had never left her heart, so there was nothing to forgive. And so the mother and her son went back to live in the cottage together happily. But that spring, the young man fell in love with the young woman with the firewood, and they were married. And the 3 of them settled in the cottage in peace and happiness. But soon there were 4, then there were 5, then there were 6. For the young couple soon had children of their own. And soon the cottage was filled with love, and that was the greatest magic of all. The end.